She'd been in a coma for 7 days. The best doctors had failed. A billionaire tried, and still nothing. Then, just after midnight, a barefoot black boy nobody knew walked into the hospital, looked at her, and whispered 5 simple words: "I can wake her up." At first they laughed, but what happened next? It shocked the world. This isn't just a story, it's voodoo. It's a miracle. The hospital room was a cold chamber of endless routine. White walls reflecting harsh light, blinking machines marking time like a broken metronome, and that low, ceaseless beeping that had become more cruel than comforting. The air was tinged with the sterile bite of antiseptic, and even the colour of the curtains seemed to have faded into despair. 9-year-old Amara lay unmoving under a pink blanket, dotted with cartoon stars, tubes snaking from her arms, machines quietly breathing for her. Her face, once filled with expression and mischief, was now ghostly pale, her dark curls fanned against the stiff white pillow. The silence around her was not peaceful, it was paralyzing. Just a week ago, she was dancing barefoot in the kitchen, laughing at breakfast with her father, but then, in one horrifying blink, she collapsed while tying her shoes for school. The doctors called it an acute cerebral shutdown. No trauma, no warning, no explanation, just silence. Her father, Elijah Martin, a strong, broad-shouldered man who had built bridges and homes with his bare hands, now sat helpless beside her, his calloused fingers gently wrapped around her tiny, lifeless one. He didn't cry. He couldn't. His tears had dried up on day 2. Now, all that remained was a quiet storm behind his eyes. He read her stories in whispers, hummed lullabies from memory, talked to her about the phases of the moon, the way Venus had shone bright the night before, but nothing reached her, nothing came back. Each hour that passed without movement was another grain of sand falling through a glass he couldn't flip, and still he stayed. The days blended into one another, nurses rotating like clockwork, monitors blinking with the same dull rhythm, and doctors speaking in softer and softer voices. One called it miraculous she was even alive. Another said she might wake up, or she might not, almost in the same breath. The medical team was running out of tests, running out of guesses, and slowly beginning to run out of time. Still, Elijah refused to leave. He hadn't stepped outside the hospital in 5 days. The nurses whispered words like devotion and obsession. The doctors began speaking to him about hospital policy, next steps, and insurance. And just as hope began to erode into dust, something unexpected happened. On Thursday afternoon, Devon Langston arrived. A tech billionaire and self-proclaimed medical disruptor, Langston didn't knock. He swept into the hospital with a PR team and 2 private guards, all sunglasses and stiff suits. He had read about Amara's story in a regional paper while sipping imported espresso in his rooftop suite. What he saw wasn't a sick girl. He saw an opportunity. He offered Elijah a solution wrapped in buzzwords: neural re-stimulation, AI-powered diagnostics, and top international neurologists flown in under his brand's medical initiative. "I'm not here to sell," Langston said with a smirk. "I'm here to solve." Elijah, worn down and desperate, asked the only question that mattered. "Will it bring her back?" Langston chuckled, pushing his designer sunglasses higher. "Black boy," he said smugly, "I know how to make your daughter wake up. Trust me. We'll upgrade her brain like an iPhone." The words hit the air like gunfire. Elijah's fists clenched. "She's not a machine," he said quietly. "She's a little girl." Langston dismissed the comment with a wave of his hand. "Emotion makes you weak. Science wins." And so began 2 days of tech show theatrics. Langston's team brought in high-frequency stimulators, wearable EEG helmets, virtual simulations, and even an immersive VR headset that was gently lowered over Amara's unresponsive face. They talked about neural rewiring, auditory bridges, and visual triggers. But Amara didn't stir. Not for the simulations, not for the specialists, not even when Langston brought in his dream mapping device. Slowly, one by one, the specialists left. Quietly. shamefully. By Sunday evening, even Langston stopped coming. The PR team faded away. The experimental machines stayed behind, humming softly like ghosts of failure. And Elijah remained by her side, whispering stories about the stars. Then, just past midnight, the seventh night, came the knock. A nurse tapped gently on the window of the family waiting room. Elijah was half asleep in a chair, his neck crooked, a blanket around his shoulders. "Mr. Martin," the nurse whispered, "there's a boy here. He says he wants to help." Elijah stirred, confused. "What boy?" She pointed to the main lobby. There, under the humming fluorescent lights, sat a barefoot black child on a cold bench. He couldn't have been older than 11. He wore an oversized grey hoodie with frayed sleeves, jeans that were torn at the knees, and his skin was marked with street dust. But it was his eyes that stopped Elijah cold. Deep, calm, clear. Too still for a child. The boy stood up as Elijah approached and nodded respectfully. "Are you Amara's father?" he asked. Elijah, hesitant and wary, nodded slowly. "Who are you?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, he said 5 words that felt like thunder in Elijah's chest. "I can wake her up." "I can wake her?" Elijah stared at the boy as if his tired eyes were lying to him, unsure whether this was grief's hallucination or a real, breathing child standing before him with dust on his cheeks and certainty in his voice. "What did you say?" he asked again, the disbelief heavy in his throat. The boy didn't flinch. "I know how to wake her up." He said it like a fact, not a hope, not a theory, not a guess. Just truth. Elijah blinked slowly, his whole body aching from a week of tension and heartache. "You're just a kid," he murmured. The boy nodded once, calm and steady. "But sometimes it takes someone small to remind people of big things." Elijah gave a bitter chuckle and rubbed his forehead. "Doctors couldn't help her. A billionaire couldn't help her. What makes you think you can?" The boy took a step closer. "She's not gone," he said softly. "She's listening, but she's afraid. She doesn't know if it's safe to come back." The words hit Elijah like a sudden gust of cold air. He hadn't cried in 3 days, not since he'd run out of tears. But this boy, this child standing barefoot in the hospital lobby, was cracking open something inside him with every quiet syllable. "What does she need then?" Elijah asked. "More tests? Some kind of spiritual healing?" The boy looked up into his eyes, not afraid, not uncertain, but knowing. "She needs what the hospital can't give. She needs the truth, your truth, the one you've been hiding behind strength." Elijah stared at him, stunned silent. The boy didn't blink. "You don't have to understand it. Just believe it's possible." Every instinct told Elijah this was absurd, impossible, irresponsible. But something, maybe that broken, exhausted father buried under layers of fear, nodded. "Can I sit with her?" the boy asked gently. Elijah hesitated, then slowly opened the door and gestured him inside. The boy stepped in with reverence, not like a visitor, but like someone returning to sacred ground. He walked to Amara's bedside and stood still for a moment, then reached out and gently laid his hand on her forehead. His lips moved. Silent, soft, like prayer, but not quite. There was no chant, no glowing miracle, no sudden movement, just a hush. The kind of hush you feel more than hear. Then he turned to Elijah and said, "Now you." Elijah blinked. "What?" "She knows you're here, but she needs to know why you're still here." Elijah's breath caught in his throat. Then, without fully knowing why, he stepped forward and gripped his daughter's small hand. His voice cracked before he even spoke. "I wasn't there, baby girl," he whispered. I was late for work that morning. I missed breakfast. I missed your smile. I missed the moment something felt wrong. His tears returned, not violent, but thick and raw. I should have stayed home. I should have held you longer. I should have seen something. Anything. I failed you. And now I just want one more chance to get it right. His tears landed on her blanket. He squeezed her hand, trembling. Please come back. I won't miss a moment again. I swear it. I swear. Then, out of nowhere, the heart monitor blinked a little faster. Not an alarm, not a scare, just a shift. One tiny heartbeat faster. The nurse, half asleep in her station, sat upright. Did you see that? Elijah asked, not sure if he was dreaming. I did, said the boy quietly. She's listening. And then he turned to leave. Wait, Elijah said, his voice hoarse. What's your name? The boy paused at the door. Isaiah, he replied, without turning back. I'll be back tomorrow. And just like that, he disappeared into the dim hallway, barefoot, quiet, and unforgettable. The sun had barely cracked over the horizon, yet Elijah hadn't moved a single inch. His back ached from sleeping upright in a hard plastic chair, his eyes were red from tears that never truly stopped, and his mind teetered between exhaustion and fear. But his spirit, somehow, was alert. Because sometime in the deepest part of that night, when the world outside had gone still, Amara's index finger had twitched again, just once. A tiny, ghost-like motion that no machine had prompted. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Elijah had leaned forward, breath caught in his chest, watching, hoping it wasn't just a trick of the light or wishful thinking. A nurse on the night shift passed by as he tried to explain what he saw. She checked the monitor, scanned the chart, and eventually smiled politely. No change, Mr. Martin, she said softly. Are you sure you weren't dreaming? He didn't argue. He didn't even blink, because he knew what he saw. Not on the machine, but on his daughter's hand, that finger. It had moved. It didn't need to happen twice for him to believe it. He just sat there, silent and still, watching over her like a lighthouse during a storm. Later that day, as the sky turned pale blue and nurses rotated shifts, it happened again. This time, it was her toes. Elijah had just stepped out into the hallway to refill his coffee when a shriek came from inside the room. One of the nurses, a soft-spoken woman named Clarissa, rushed to the door, wide-eyed. Her foot! It moved! She exclaimed. A team of doctors poured in like floodwaters, checking vitals, increasing monitor sensitivity, tapping her reflex points. Machines were restarted, notes were taken, orders were given. Elijah stood just outside the doorframe, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Yet he said nothing. He didn't need to. He just smiled, a deep, cracked, weary smile, and quietly whispered, I knew it. As more medical professionals began to swarm, trying to explain what they didn't understand, Elijah stayed by Amara's side, barely breathing. This doesn't make sense, one of the doctors whispered as they reviewed her EEG data. The scans didn't show any progress. This kind of recovery doesn't happen like this. Elijah looked at him, eyes tired but calm, and said, It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be real. News of her sudden improvement started to spread through the halls. Family members from other rooms whispered about the little girl in room 307. Nurses who'd dismissed Elijah's quiet faith started watching Amara a little more closely. And then came the most incredible moment of all, the impossible one. Just before dinner, trays were delivered. As the sky dimmed again into early dusk, Amara's eyelids fluttered, once, twice. Then slowly, with a quiet inhale, they opened. Her dark brown eyes scanned the ceiling, confused but conscious. Daddy, she whispered, her voice barely audible but unmistakably real. Elijah dropped to his knees at her side, face crumbling into tears that he couldn't stop if he tried. He clutched her hand, like it was the first time, like it was the last time, like it was everything in between. "I'm here, baby," he sobbed. "I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere, ever again." The moment Amara opened her eyes, the world inside the hospital changed. The nurse who witnessed it was the first to speak, her voice cracking with emotion as she whispered into her comm, "She's awake." Doctors came running, pushing aside carts and rushing in with scanners and clipboards. Elijah stood motionless, overwhelmed by joy, as Amara weakly looked around the room, confused, her fingers slowly curling around her father's hand. "Amara?" one doctor asked cautiously. "Do you know where you are?" She blinked, then nodded slowly. "Hospital," she said, her voice soft and dry. Elijah laughed through his tears, brushing curls from her forehead. But in the hallway, news travelled like wildfire. Word of a miraculous awakening spread from one wing to another, until it reached the front desk and beyond. Within hours, the story hit local media. Girl in coma for 8 days wakes up. No medical explanation. Nurses whispered. Doctors debated. Some speculated it was spontaneous neurological recovery. Others leaned toward misdiagnosis. But nobody had answers. And in the middle of the commotion stood Elijah, calm as stone, holding his daughter's hand with a stillness that only comes from knowing the truth. Not the medical kind, but the human one. By nightfall, the noise outside the hospital grew. Flashing lights from local news crews reflected against the lobby windows. The billionaire Devon Langston returned, flanked by PR people, a private videographer, and a press badge clipped to his suit. He strode in confidently and spoke loud enough for nearby reporters to hear. "We're glad our advanced system yielded results. My team knew we were close." Elijah stepped between Langston and Amara's room, like a wall. "Your machines didn't wake her," he said. "That boy did." Langston laughed politely for the cameras. "Sure, the boy, very magical." He waved dismissively and continued toward the wing. But the doctors had already confirmed they hadn't used Langston's equipment in 24 hours. "She woke on her own," they told him. "Nothing we did explains this." Still, Langston made his statement for the cameras before leaving, taking credit for a miracle he didn't cause. But Elijah ignored all of it. That night, just after 9 p.m., Elijah sat by Amara's bed, reading her a picture book when a shadow appeared in the doorway. He didn't even need to look up. "Isaiah," he whispered. The boy entered quietly, barefoot again, hoodie sleeves too long for his arms. Elijah stood. "You came back," he said. Isaiah smiled. "I said I would." Amara's eyes widened as he stepped closer. "It's you," she said, voice raspy but warm. Isaiah gently placed a hand on her forehead and whispered, "You were never lost, just waiting." Elijah stared, caught in awe again by this quiet visitor who had changed their world. A nurse from the hallway rushed forward, shocked. "Wait, who are you? What hospital let you in? Where are your parents?" Isaiah turned to her, calm. "Some kids aren't from here," he said softly. "Some of us come when we're needed and leave when we're not." The nurse blinked, but before she could grab her tablet to log his ID, Isaiah walked down the hallway and vanished into the corridor light. Security checked cameras. Nothing, no footage of him entering. No exit logs. No digital trace. It was as if he was never there. But Elijah didn't need proof. He didn't want to prove it. His daughter was alive, awake, breathing. And every word Isaiah had spoken was burned into Elijah's memory like scripture. That night, Elijah sat by Amara's bed, the machines now humming with comfort instead of fear, her breathing steady. As she slept peacefully for the first time in days, Elijah whispered aloud to the empty room, "Sometimes it takes someone small to remind people of big things." He didn't know where Isaiah came from. He didn't know if he'd ever return. But he knew this. The miracle wasn't in the science. It was in the silence, the love, and the whisper that finally broke through. Weeks passed, and slowly life tiptoed back into the Martin home. Amara's recovery wasn't instant, but every day brought a little more light. First, she smiled. Then she whispered songs. Then came sitting up, playing with dolls, and asking about school. Physical therapy followed. Nurses cheered as she took her first step with shaky legs and whispered, "I did it, Daddy." Elijah wept into his hands behind the curtain, pretending he had dust in his eyes. The hospital room that once felt like a prison now felt like a shrine, a place where something divine had happened, something that couldn't be explained on any medical chart. Doctors continued to check her vitals, run scans, and compare old results with new ones. Still no explanation, they admitted again and again. Elijah stopped asking for one. He knew better now. Some things aren't meant to be explained. Some things are meant to be honored. Amara, once a silent statue in a sea of machines, now filled the room with laughter and crayon drawings on hospital walls. Her favorite was the one she drew of Isaiah, a barefoot boy with big eyes and a hoodie that reached past his hands. "He touched my head," she told one nurse, "and he gave Daddy his voice back." Nurses exchanged glances. Doctors frowned at the files. But the more she healed, the more the mystery grew. Who was this boy? Where did he come from? Why did the cameras show nothing and the guest log remain blank? Outside the hospital, the story took on a life of its own. The media called it the coma miracle and ran headline after headline. Girl wakes after 8 days. Billionaire claims credit, but father credits a mysterious boy. Langston, now desperate to stay relevant, tried to spin the story in his favor. He gave interviews, launched a marketing campaign, and even teased a new miracle protocol his company would license to hospitals. But the public wasn't buying it. They watched Elijah on a quiet local news segment where he spoke with no flash, no script. "My daughter didn't wake up because of wires," he said. "She woke up because someone reminded her she was loved and reminded me that I still had something to say." The internet exploded. Millions shared the video. Comments poured in. "Where can we find Isaiah? My child is in a coma too. How can we contact him? Do you think he was an angel?" But no one ever found him. Not in phone records. Not in photos, not even on security footage. Hospitals across the country received handwritten letters from desperate parents. A few even claimed to have seen barefoot children whispering into bedsides. But nothing ever stuck. Still, the belief grew, not in a machine, not in a billionaire's lab, but in the idea that healing sometimes wears skin, speaks softly, and vanishes before the world can prove it. Elijah and Amara eventually left the hospital, but every night before bed she'd still ask, "Do you think Isaiah will come back?" Elijah always kissed her forehead and said he never really left. Back home, Amara returned to her routine: school, art class, piano practice. But something in her had changed. She was gentler, more patient, and often paused before speaking, as if listening to something inside. Elijah changed too. He returned to work but began volunteering at local shelters on weekends. He spoke less and listened more. And any time he saw a parent struggling or a child with tired eyes, he leaned down and shared his story. Not the polished version, not the one the reporters told, but the real one. The one where a man broke, a daughter faded, and a boy with no shoes saved them both. And slowly others began to believe. Not just in miracles, but in the idea that love, truth, and hope, spoken with humility, could move mountains. One rainy evening, nearly 6 months after Amara woke up, Elijah sat alone in the same hospital chapel he once visited in despair. He whispered a quiet thank you into the silence. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a pair of small footprints, muddy, right on the white marble floor. He blinked. The chapel was empty, but the air felt warmer somehow, lighter. As if someone had just walked through it with a message that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Elijah smiled. "Isaiah," he whispered, "I remember." Because in the end, he knew, not every healer wears a white coat. Not every miracle is visible. And not every boy is meant to stay. But the smallest voices sometimes carry the loudest echoes. Some stories stay with us, not because they're easy to explain, but because they remind us of who we are and what we believe is still possible. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories that will shake your heart, open your eyes, and maybe, just maybe, restore a little faith in this world. Don't forget to like, share, and comment below because someone out there needs to hear this too.